Welcome back to Unsolicited Feedback, the podcast where we cut through the noise, skip the corporate jargon, and get real about what actually drives results. Because let's be honest, hope is not a business strategy. I'm your host, Chuck Knabusch, the operations guy. After 40 plus years across the military, corporate America, and now entrepreneurship, I've seen what works, what breaks, and why leadership, planning, and execution are the greatest separators between average and exceptional results. As you're catching the replay, send your thoughts or challenges directly to me at chuck@13ten.com, chuck@1310.com. As your time matters, so let's jump straight into today's topic. Stop blaming the weather. Why leaders hide behind constraints and how to break the habit. Let me start with a question that will make some people uncomfortable. How often do you explain underperformance by pointing at something you can't control? It could be the market, the labor pool, corporate policy, or regulations. It could be legacy systems, supply chain issues, culture, or just the way this plant has always been. Now, before you answer too quickly, let me be clear. Most of those things are real. They do matter. And yes, some environments are objectively harder than others. But here's the dangerous truth. Constraints become excuses the moment leaders stop acting inside them. And I learned this lesson the hard way. During a quarterly review, I thought was going just fine. I've been on the leadership team at a manufacturing plant for a while. We were no strangers to corporate reviews. The drill was familiar to us. 2 days of presentations, performance metrics, financials, HR, continuous improvement, safety, plant walkthroughs, the whole 9 yards. Serious time and serious preparation. At one point, our HR manager explained why our workers' compensation metric was still bad. That explanation sounded reasonable. It passed our preparation sniff test. The laws in our state don't allow certain programs that other states use. So those plants can drive better numbers. There were nods all around the room. Slides advanced. We were ready to move on. Then the senior vice president of operations stops everything. He asks just one question. Are you actively working to change the law? There was silence in the room. We looked at one another. He asks again, this time a little slower. Are you lobbying? Are you engaging regulators? Are you doing anything to change the constraint you're blaming? Well, we weren't. And then he said something I've never forgotten. Then stop hiding behind the environmental constraints and focus on what you can control, because by next quarter, this needs to improve. No threats. No yelling, no theatrics, just clarity, direction, and a timeline. And you know what? He was right. We weren't victims of the environment. We were hiding behind it. And by the next review, we did improve. That moment reshaped how I think about leadership. And today, I want to unpack that lesson with you. Because this problem shows up everywhere. Leaders confuse constraints with permission to underperform. The biggest problem isn't regulation. It isn't corporate oversight. It isn't geography or labor laws or union contracts. No, the biggest problem is when leaders treat constraints as absolution. When the performance stalls, the explanation sounds like, if we were in a different state, or if corporate would just let us, if the market weren't doing this, if we had better people. What's happening isn't analysis, it's abdication. Constraints exist in every system. They always have, and they always will. But high-performing leaders do something different. They separate what they can't control from what they haven't tried. And most organizations blur that line conveniently. The hidden version of the problem. Here's the second, quieter problem underneath this. Leaders are rewarded for explanations, not execution. If you can explain poor results well enough with data, benchmarks, charts, and context, you can survive a long time without fixing anything. And that's where performance goes to die. So what's the biggest symptom? Well, exceptional storytelling about mediocre results. Here's how you know this problem is present. The symptom. Your team can explain the numbers better than they can change them. You'll hear things like, when you adjust for X, we're actually not that bad. Or, compared to others in our category, how about given the environment? Or, historically, this has always been a challenge. And none of those statements are false. They're just irrelevant. Because the results don't care about context. What this looks like in practice. PowerPoint decks get better. Narratives get tighter. Footnotes multiply. Benchmarks appear. External comparisons expand. But the actual metric, flat or worse. And leadership teams, they convince themselves they're being responsible when they're really being defensive. Here's the emotional trap. Here's why this symptom is so seductive. It feels like competence. You sound informed, thoughtful, measured, professional. But if explanation replaces action, professionalism becomes camouflage. So what do most people try to do to fix it? Well, they argue harder, they benchmark deeper, they escalate upward. When leaders sense pressure around performance, most respond in predictable ways. The first attempt, build a better case. They gather more data, more peer comparisons, more legal nuance, or more historical context. And the hope is, if they understand how constrained we are, expectations will adjust. Sometimes they do, but improvement doesn't follow. Attempt number 2, they escalate the constraint. The next move is ask corporate for exceptions, request waivers, push decisions upward, blame policy. This turns leadership into lobbying internally without changing the results externally. Attempt number 3, wait for conditions to improve. This one is silent but deadly. Leaders tell themselves, once X changes, then we'll fix Y. But X rarely changes. And if it does, the organization hasn't built the muscle to perform anyway. So why that rarely works? Because constraints don't change. Capability does. Here's the hard truth that leaders need to hear. Constraints aren't the reason performance lags. They're the environment in which performance is proven. High performers don't wait for ideal conditions. They adapt inside imperfect ones. The myth of fair comparison. Organizations love to compare themselves to peers, but selectively. The same industry, the same size, the same geography even. But they ignore the inconvenient truth. Some peers outperform despite worse constraints, and that destroys the narrative. Why leaders resist this? Because accepting this means admitting we didn't push hard enough. We accepted good enough. We mistook explanation for leadership. And that's uncomfortable. But it's also the turning point. The senior VP's question revisited. When the senior VP asked, "Are you actively working to change the law?" he wasn't suggesting lobbying as a solution. He was exposing the flaw in our logic. If the constraint were truly the blocker, we'd be fighting it. And we weren't. Which meant the real opportunity was inside the fence. Here's the one thing that actually moves the needle. Relentlessly separate what you can't control from what you haven't tried. If leaders take only one thing from this video, it should be stop asking what's outside our control and start asking What are we not doing because it's uncomfortable? Step 1, draw the line explicitly. In your next leadership meeting, do this. Create 2 columns. Column A, the truly uncontrollable, laws, regulations, geography, market conditions. Column B, uncomfortable but controllable, behavior, processes, training, discipline, accountability, leadership presence. Most teams avoid that column B. That's where performance lives. Step 2, kill the narrative. Keep the data. Data is useful. Narrative, dangerous. Use data to identify gaps, not to justify them. If your explanation takes longer than your improvement plan, you've lost the plot. Step 3, set direction without drama. The senior vice president didn't threaten us. He didn't shame us. He did 3 things. He named the excuse, he redirected the focus to control, and he set a clear timeline. That's leadership. No theatrics, just standards. Step 4, build capability inside the constraints. Once we stopped blaming the law, we found better return to work processes, improved case management, stronger supervisor engagement, earlier intervention, and clear ownership. None of that required changing legislation. It required changing behavior. What about some counterintuitive truths leaders need to hear? Let me leave you with a few uncomfortable truths. Constraints don't lower expectations. Leaders do. Explaining results is not the same as owning them. If performance improves only when conditions improve, you don't have a system. You have luck. Great leaders don't deny reality. They refuse to hide behind it. So here's the wake-up call most leaders need. That quarterly review could have gone differently. We could have doubled down on our explanation. We could have argued fairness. We could have demanded understanding. Instead, that one question cut through everything. What are you doing about it? That's the question every leader needs to ask before someone else does. Because hope is not a strategy, and context is not a plan. Execution is. If this hit close to home, good. That's where growth starts. If you found value here, subscribe. Share it with a leader who needs that reminder. And most importantly, take a hard look at where you might be hiding behind the weather. Because performance doesn't care why. It only cares whether you deliver. And that's a wrap for today's episode of Unsolicited Feedback. Thanks for joining me, but don't just nod along. Apply something from today's conversation. Because results don't show up just from listening. They show up because you did something. Even one small action this week will move the needle further than a month of good intentions. If you want to go deeper, scan the QR code or schedule a 30-minute strategy chat. I'd love to hear how you're using planning, leadership, and execution to make sure hope never becomes your business strategy. Drop a comment and like the episode. I'm Chuck Knabusch. Until next time, stay focused, stay disciplined, and don't you dare rely on hope.